welcome to the show. Today is episode 3 in the Zeries. The Zeries, Generation Z, where I take a look at what life looks like for younger folks. Now, technically, today's guest, Aimee Chase, is a millennial, but it still qualifies because I just absolutely had to talk to Aimee, who I've gotten to know really well over the years. Aimee is actually a really good friend of mine's daughter. Steve Chase is a close friend and mentor who I met through the show, and he is also the director of the federal government's Fish and Wildlife's National Conservation Training Center, where a whole bunch of really amazing things happens. Continuing education for park rangers, education for young people all over the country. It's where I participated several years in the tribal youth conferences and the Green Schools Initiative, which Aimee was really instrumental in bringing actually into the fold at the federal government. Aimee Chase is my guest. She is a licensed professional counselor. She has a bachelor's degree in psychology. She has 2 master's degrees, one in forensic and legal psychology and one in clinical mental health counseling. In my conversation with Aimee today, we open by talking about her diagnosis of breast cancer a year ago that she's received surgery and treatment for. We get all into that. We talk about the loss of a friend of hers when she was in high school to suicide. We talk about her 4 visits to India, her work as a psychotherapist in the inner city in Washington, D.C. with folks who are dealing with serious addiction, as well as a relationship with her family, her friends, and so much more. It's a really interesting look inside Aimee's life, and even though she's only 33, she's already seen so much of it, more than many of us, in fact, and so I thought she would be a great person to talk to, and I was right. In the Zeries, generally what I do is I have pre-interviews with these guests, so I talk to them privately for sometimes a couple of hours, 1 hour or 2, phone calls. I learn about them, I ask them questions, and then I pull out what I think is the most important and interesting stuff for the interview, and I lay it down for you as I did right here with Aimee Chase. I think you're really going to like this. This is my effort to have unique and important conversations with people who aren't necessarily well known publicly, but are doing interesting and important work in their lives, as well as help us understand what folks who are in generations behind us, how they're dealing and how they look at and how they live their lives. I put a lot of work into these interviews, a lot of time into them, and a lot of care. So I hope that you will listen and share this with your friends, because I learned a lot in my conversation with Aimee today, as I always do in all of these conversations. So thank you so much for listening, supporting, and subscribing. And now it's time to get to it. Ladies and gentlemen, my friend Aimee Chase.
I'm so happy that you agreed to this, and I'm so excited to put it down on tape finally. Hi.
Yeah, hi. Me too. I'm really excited.
I was trying to think of how long we've known each other through your dad, and I guess all I can say is I knew you when you were in high school, when you were a smart high school kid working on an environmental program, right? Is that how long?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think we met in 2008 or 2009, so however long that is now.
Been a while, but I'm really happy to talk to you because I've gotten to watch the last, 15 years of your life or so, and you've seen and done so much. I thought it would make for an awesome guest and conversation, and I kind of wanted to start kind of in the present, maybe work our way back, because I think something that is obviously very unique about you is that you were diagnosed with breast cancer at a very young age, not too long ago. So can you kind of take me back to that? Yeah. I remember your dad calling me and telling me, and I just didn't know what to do other than follow up with him as much as I possibly could, reached out to you. But where were you in your life? How did you find this out?
Yeah, so it was last February I was officially diagnosed. February of 2022. So I was 29 years old, just about. And I had just come back from a long European New Year's vacation. I was in Barcelona and Amsterdam and having a great time, and got back to reality and felt a lump and didn't really think much of it at first. Just thought, I'll go get this checked out. It's probably nothing. But pretty quickly I went in for a mammogram and people were acting a little weird around me. I started to figure it out pretty quickly what was going on. So in a matter of a few days, I went in, had a mammogram, got a biopsy, and kind of knew what it was going to be. Interestingly enough, actually, I also had a trip for Valentine's Day planned to go to Paris the same day that all this happened.
Wow.
So I obviously was shocked and upset. And I asked basically everybody I saw that day, like, should I go to Paris? Should I go? Everybody said yes. So I still made it to Paris. It was great. And then when I got back, I got back on Monday, I think, and then Tuesday I got the call that confirmed, yes, the tumor is cancerous. So that was sort of the start of everything, start of 2022.
I mean, you're 29 years old and you're working at this really impressive job. You're in a relationship. Mm-hmm. Things, as you say, are, on paper going really well. I mean, coming out of obviously the pandemic. Mm-hmm. We all experienced that. So what do you do? What are the next few days and weeks like for you? You have a pretty good support system, I think, from my point of view. Your parents, You're both close to your parents. Like I said, in a relationship, you've got a lot of friends. Mm-hmm. And you have this resource that's your own education. That I think is like kind of where it's so interesting, unique about you. You're 29, you find out this news. What does Aimee do?
Yeah, it's interesting to think back about it. I think funnily enough, like one of the hardest parts was having to tell people, having to tell my parents, having to tell my boyfriend, and even my friends. I sat down to draft this big group message. Like, how do I break this news to people, in a way that's, serious, but not too serious, I never thought about that before, how that would be to break the news. But I told them and people, rallied around me. And for better or for worse, I'd been through this in some ways or in a different way years before. My mom was diagnosed with breast cancer in 2014. So I had some idea about what things might be like. That's and right. I think in some ways that helped me. So I just sort of rallied the troops and had a good mindset about it. I was like, all right, well, here we go. Like, buckle up, pretty much.
That was interesting when I found this out about you. When your dad told me, I was kind of like, wow, this woman's very resourced to handle such a thing. Whereas a lot of other people do have a much harder time for any number of reasons. But you're also saying the reaction was like, one of the hardest things is you've just been diagnosed with cancer. Now you have to worry about other people's feelings and they don't want you to worry about their feelings. Gets complicated, but you dove in, you took it on, you shaved the head, you did the chemo. Tell me kind of your treatment year and how you emotionally, psychologically managed through that time.
Yeah. I think one thing about me and about how I was raised is, I was always sort of cerebral and serious in some ways. I mean, I like to think I have a good sense of humor too, but I've thought a lot about mortality, humanity, what that might mean, having a rich spiritual life. My mom always called it the life of the mind and how important that was. So I think that was a big strength for me going into this. Like, I already sort of asked a lot of these hard questions for myself or thought about what it means to be a human being and our lives and that tomorrow's not promised. So in some ways I felt prepared, extra prepared for that. But so I got this diagnosis and I had to get doctors lined up, figure out what comes first. It's different for everyone depending on whether they do chemo first, radiation, whether surgery's first, what type of surgery, that sort of thing. So it was a lot of doctor's appointments, figuring out like I'm gonna have to take time off work. But I was diagnosed February 22nd, 2022. And then by March 30th, I was in the hospital early morning to have surgery. I opted to do a bilateral mastectomy. So the right breast was healthy, but I decided the risk was too high. Figured if I'm already going in, they're going to take everything everything out. And they did reconstruction and implants as well. But I decided it was best to just do both if I was going to do it.
Was that a long, tough decision? Did you think about it a long time, talk about it a long time, read about other people's choices?
That actually I was pretty decisive about that. Yeah. I'd never done a major surgery. I got my wisdom teeth out. That was it. So that part was pretty scary for me. And I was thinking, I don't want to have to do this again if I can help it. So might as well just have them, first of all, match, but, reduce the risk at the same time. And that was a pretty easy decision for me. When the doctor said, a lumpectomy is not an option. And for people who don't know, a lumpectomy is just when they take out the tumor and leave the rest of the breast tissue. But for me, that wasn't going to be a possibility. So I figured just take it all out, and that was okay. I felt that was a pretty easy decision, actually.
Yeah, I've not really talked or known anybody who's had to make that decision. I'm sure it's different for everybody at different ages. But so the surgery, you do that. And what comes next?
So after that, there was a question sort of if we do the surgery, will I have to do chemo or will I have to do radiation? That was sort of up in the air for a while.
Oh.
So it wasn't set in stone, but once I'd recovered a little bit and they had done further testing and, talking to other doctors, they told me, yes, chemo, you're going to have to do that. So, but before that, they wanted me to go through the process of freezing eggs. Chemo can be really hard on the body. It can put people into menopause really early or make them sterile. So the next thing was going through the process of giving myself shots for, a few weeks. And then it was sort of just an outpatient surgery, but taking the eggs out. And then after that,
I didn't know that. I'm such an idiot, but I guess I've never really thought about it. Harvesting eggs is a surgery. They have to go in and.
Yeah, they do. It's
right.
Sort of weird. For all the women listening, they'll know what it's like, when you go to your annual gyno appointment and there's these stirrups. It's like that, but a bit more intense. They're bigger, but yeah, it was okay. It was pretty easy. I did have some pain later on, but it wasn't bad. Nothing like the surgery before. So
right. So yeah, I hear that's pretty rough.
Yeah.
Then what? Chemo?
Then chemo.
And how was that for you?
Chemo was interesting. You asked before if I'd done any reading about other people's experiences, and that was one thing that I pretty much didn't do at all and still haven't done throughout this cancer.
Conscious choice?
Yeah.
Why?
I do tend to be a little bit of a hypochondriac. And I was already worried enough or frightened enough that I thought, I want to have my own experience. What someone else, went through, maybe I'll go through something similar. Maybe my experience will be totally different,
right.
But I wanted to avoid sort of having any sort of expectation as to what it was going to be. I just wanted to experience it.
That's interesting. That's an interesting choice. I would not make that choice, I think. I always want to know, before I do a thing, it's almost anything, even a water slide, a rope swing. How was it, bro? Was it good? Yeah. Watch out for that rock. Okay, cool. I want to be prepared with other people's experiences. I feel like on a lot of things to go in. So I would be probably even more nervous or scared not knowing. But as you said, people are different about that. And I can totally see your point of view. So you then got the chemo. So not knowing, how was it?
It was okay. I had a relatively, I don't want to say mild, but I had 4 rounds of chemo and they were separated by 3 weeks in between. So I had some breathing room in the in-between. And, the first round wasn't so bad. I had a few days. I think my chemo day was usually on Wednesdays. So I would have the weekend to recover. And you just don't feel very good some nausea, and they give you meds, but nausea, sort of fatigue, but wakefulness, just feeling kind of weak and weird. But the first one was okay. And, my hair was still long at that time. And that was another thing that I was really holding on to. I was like, I'm not going to shave it preemptively. I just want to wait and see. And it's interesting actually how that happened, because my first round of chemo, my mom came with me. They were still kind of strict about who could be there because of COVID, and everyone in the infusion center is different levels of health and immunity support. But so she went with me, and sitting across from me was a woman who looked about my age, which was interesting because, at the time I was feeling kind of isolated in that, like being so young.
Yeah.
But she and I ended up striking up a conversation while we were both getting chemo. I don't remember how it started exactly.
Oh my God, come on. Like that's the best part. Like two young women being in there and not knowing anybody else. And then you're just like, so what's your sitch?
Right. Yeah. It was great. And we,
wow.
It was so funny too, because there's all these like little coincidences, right? So I go in and we start to talk, and she's lovely. We have a lot of things in common, both live in DC. And at some point I started, asking her about where she was in her process and if she had any pro tips for me, basically. And the one piece of advice she gave me was, she said, when your hair starts falling out, shave it right away. She was saying, like, mine started to fall out and I waited a really long time, couple weeks, and it was really traumatic for her. So that was the one piece of advice that I took. And so it didn't happen until my first chemo was in May. And then after the second chemo, I believe it was either right before it or right after it, my hair did start to fall out.
How was that?
How was it?
Well, I mean, just, it's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's why I was so shocked. I was 23. I was like, this is bullshit. What is happening? I'm becoming my father. But like, you can prepare, whatever your relationship is with your hair, with your appearance, it's going to happen at some point. I suppose you accept that. But like, it still could be, I could see it being really traumatic. And, some women choose to wear wigs. You shave your head. You look great. You look strong. You look beautiful. But at least that, that's what I saw on Instagram, basically. What was your journey? Was it hard? Was it dramatic? Was it empowering?
It was a mix of all those things. When it started to fall out, I think I was in New York, actually. My cousin had a baby shower and it was starting to fall out that weekend. And Colin, my boyfriend, he was there as well. And my head started to kind of hurt as well. Like, it was a weird feeling. So I didn't want to touch my hair. I started already having this aversion where I was like, okay, it's time. So we agreed on the train ride back to DC. We were like, tonight's the night. So we went to CVS. He got, a big electric shaver, and we actually recorded the whole thing. I haven't watched it back yet, but he shaved my head, and that was really important to me. And I think it was important to him too. It was kind of cool. And we made it fun. We laughed. Once we got my hair was, probably, you can't see all of me, but it was pretty long. So we cut the longest parts off and kind of laughed at what it looked like, actually about this length, but it was sticking straight out and looking crazy. But I was frightened. My hair has been such a huge part of me, and I've always had, really long hair, and it was a big point of pride and my identity as a woman. And so I was really frightened to do that. But it was because of, Charlie, the woman that I met at chemo, that, her advice and sort of her bravery in that, I trusted her. It's like, okay, she says I should do it, it'll be better. And she was right. Once I shaved it, it actually wasn't as bad as I thought. I, looked kind of cool. It felt kind of nice. It wasn't so bad. Yeah.
And now you're, going through all the stages of growing it back. But I don't want to,
Yes.
I don't want to fast forward to where you're at now. I just want to ask you, we talked a little bit about the different stages, the diagnosis, surgery, chemo, shaving your head. Were there other touch points that are really important during that journey until we get to where you're at now in terms of your health, the forecast, the future?
Yeah, I think, the diagnosis, surgery, shaving my head, all those were big ones. Finishing chemo was a big deal. And at the end of chemo, again, there was a question like, will I have to do anything else? And as it seems my journey has been, yes, always. So, that was hard. I was disappointed, but they did recommend radiation. And I made the decision at that point. It was early August. Colin and I were planning to move to California. Originally, we were going to move in May, but this pushed things back. So when I was done with chemo, I thought, you know what, I'm still going to move and I'll finish things out here in California. So in the midst of all this stuff, I packed up and mid-September moved out here to Orange County and then finished my treatment here, did radiation for 7 weeks. And I didn't let it stop me, I guess, with what things I wanted to do. Maybe that's what I'm trying to get at. And
now, what have your doctors told you about your health, given all of the things, the precautions that you've taken, the treatment that you've had?
It's kind of confusing in some ways because I guess they don't say remission anymore. They definitely don't say cure. But when I was finished with radiation, my doctor told me there's no evidence of disease. So I think there's no evidence of disease. I have to do endocrine therapy. So I'm taking daily medication, tamoxifen, to basically block hormone reception in the body. The cancer that I have feeds off of hormones. So I have to get a monthly shot and take these pills daily. And basically with the hope that doing so will, if there's anything else floating around, it won't grow, it won't get bigger.
I want to ask you if there's anything that you've taken away as a lesson for your life from your diagnosis and your treatment, from, even how others reacted to you. I mean, I think one question I didn't ask, but I'm sure people always kind of want to know is like, what should your friends and loved ones do, say, and be? And obviously it's different for everybody, but any lesson from how your support group is supposed to react and relate to what you took from it as a woman, as a person that you'll carry with you, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I think my family, my partner, my friends, I had a wonderful support system. A few of my friends really stepped up to the plate. They had email chains going, schedules. They brought me food, came and hung out with me. One of my best friends, she helped me with the shots for the egg freezing. That was a big thing. That's really hard to do to yourself.
You have to give yourself a shot?
Yeah.
With a syringe?
Shots a day. Yeah.
And you didn't want to do it yourself?
I tried and I'd say I did about half of them myself, but I remember the first night I was supposed to start them and I couldn't get myself to do it.
Yeah, I can't imagine that. I've never thought about giving myself a shot, but I think that'd be pretty weird. I've seen people do it on movies, but it's like,
yeah, it goes against everything you want to do to yourself, So I called one of my best friends and it was like 9:30 at night. And luckily she lived right down the road. And I was like, I can't do it. Can't do it. And she was like, okay, coming over, be there in 5, and that's like something I never would have expected. Certainly it's like something you hope for, I guess, but she stepped up in ways that I'll never forget, helping me with that stuff. So just, I guess, friends who are open and really listening to what I needed, I suppose. And they were there and ready. That meant a lot.
Anybody do anything annoying or off-putting or even offensive that you would tell us? Anybody, like, is there something we should know? But like, stop coming over. Okay, thank you. Listen, it's 6 a.m. I appreciate it.
Right. Yeah, I think the one thing, and I didn't experience this a lot, but I mean, it's personal, I guess, but it might vary person to person. But I never wanted people to treat me any differently or with kid gloves. And I know it was always out of, thinking about me, but it's kind of, it's uncomfortable and scary to talk to people about this, And so for a while, some people I think were kind of walking on eggshells. Can I say the C word? What can I ask you about? And I'm an open book. For me, it was my experience. It was what was happening. So, no need to tiptoe around it.
And that's why I wanted to open with it and talk with you about it as a big part of our conversation, because you have been an open book about it. And I think everything that you just shared will be really helpful to people. And I imagine if a listener reached out to you for any advice, that if they were unfortunately having, a similar experience as a loved one or themselves, especially as a young woman, I'm sure you'd be happy to talk to them. I'm just volunteering you out to people. But you are a therapist, and I do want to ask you, of course, about that, because that's another obviously really fascinating thing about you. You've got about 40 degrees. You went to a lot of great schools, though, including high school. You went to like a prestigious or a private high school, and that's kind of, as we talked, we finally, we talked about your life and why you became a therapist. And you said that certainly one part of it was because of as a result of a horrible experience that you went through when you lost your friend in high school, and how the grief counselors reacted to that. You were like, you know what, maybe I'm going to be a counselor, and maybe I'm not going to do that. And it was interesting to hear that kind of unfold. But talk to me about how you decided to pursue these degrees that you have, 2 masters, a bachelor's, and obviously a very educated woman who's now a practicing therapist, who's got years of experience as a therapist now. What led you there, and how much of it had to do with losing your friend? Yeah,
I think that was a big part. And I'll kind of circle back to that. But, as a kid, I grew up singing in musical theater, lots of the arts, things like that. So I was always really interested in people, other people, the characters that maybe I played, sort of the process of acting and like what that meant, sort of learning how to empathize. I think that was sort of the beginning of it. And just this curiosity about humans. So that started really young. And I remember, being, 11 or 12 years old. And I was reading these books written by a therapist about children that she worked with. She worked mostly in the foster care system, but these really like sort of dark and serious books that I found absolutely fascinating. And I don't think my parents even knew what I was reading at that time. They probably would have been like, what? But so that interest started really early, and it sort of solidified early on into high school. I realized I was sort of choosing between, should I be a musician or should I be a therapist? And I decided I wanted to keep music as a hobby and a lifelong sort of love, but keep the professional work aspect out of that. Yeah. And I thought, therapist, that seems right. I felt called to it, as corny as that is.
Not at all.
And so I had sort of decided that already. And fast forward to senior year of high school, he said, one of my best friends, sort of a long and complex story, but she was kicked out of the school, and within a few days, she died by suicide. And that was one of the most, formative or traumatic, meaningful experiences that I've been through in my life. But we're actually coming up on the anniversary pretty soon. But so that happened, and the response of the school, the therapist that was at the school, and then they brought in an outside grief counselor to talk to our group of friends, and just the absolute mess that they made of it now being a professional, looking back, they did pretty much everything wrong. And, I felt that way then. I feel that way now. But I remember going through that experience thinking, I will never be like these people. And I need to, even more so now, I'm sort of emboldened to do this work and fix what happened to me in some way. Make sure that the people I work with never experience that. So that was really important to me.
I really appreciate you sharing that. And obviously we could talk a lot more about that and how you dealt with it. I mean, it's obviously a major issue. It's certainly for adolescents, depression, and that can lead to self-harm, much less suicide. And, I think maybe we'll talk more about that in the future, because it's an issue affecting so many young people, especially women. But I wanted to ask you about your work specifically at the Men's Residential Treatment Center that you worked at, called the National Capital Treatment and Recovery. And you were there for 4 years, and you were the primary counselor for adult men who were there as a result often of substance abuse. You managed a pretty big client load. You also gave lectures. This is mostly black men in D.C., around D.C. And you're this younger, small white woman at some point during the pandemic as well. And yet you kept going there. And as your dad would tell me, he was never worried about you because these men cared about you. You were their counselor. They protected you, and you can talk more about how you felt there and what that experience was. But my question is, who does that? Who does that work? Why that? Why for 4 years? That's a pretty fascinating, interesting, and unique experience that you chose to have.
Definitely. Yeah. And it was wonderful. I miss it. But I sort of fell into it by accident. It was basically coming up on the tail end of grad school, and we had to pick internships, and I was looking at a few, and it sort of just fell into my lap, this opportunity to work in inpatient. I knew that I wanted to work with a more underserved population. I knew I would be in private practice later on in life, and I wanted to do something maybe a little bit more challenging, something that maybe, I wanted to give it a try, I guess. And sort of my entry into this career, I just had this gut feeling that somehow working with these men, that I would do it. I felt called to it in a way. So I gave it a try and, started as an intern, and then I was a full-time employee there. But, I've always been really passionate about helping the ones maybe people have forgotten about, or the ones who are underserved in some way. And so I felt like that was really important. These are people who were dealing with, almost everyone I worked with had severe trauma. That's one thing. But there's the trauma, a lot of people had pretty serious mental health diagnoses as well, and a lot of poverty in and out of the system, all while trying to, stop using drugs and alcohol, which in and of itself is extremely difficult. So I felt like these people needed someone, if not me, someone else, but I wanted to give it a try. And I think that my curiosity for people and sort of care, interest in these people, I think that's what they saw. That's what made the difference.
That you were sincerely interested in their lives.
Yeah.
In them. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What did they teach you? What did you learn from them? I know that you have a lot of strong opinions about criminal justice policy, for one, but I'm sure, I don't know, what did you learn in your 4 years working with these men one-on-one and group therapy and lectures? I know that they taught you a lot too.
Yeah, definitely. They taught me a lot about myself and my privilege. That's for sure. And, maybe things that I took for granted, they opened my eyes to that as well. But I think the biggest thing, they taught me so much patience, and care, and they really stretched or, challenged my ability to have compassion and empathy for lots of different types of people, And I think it helped because over time, you practice, you see so many different people with different life experiences, all these really hard challenges, and not everyone is happy to be there. Most people aren't, they feel like crap. They don't want to be there. They're not their best selves at that time. But I learned pretty quickly. And I think with sort of their example or, maybe just the relationships you build therapeutically, I was able to really see what was underneath all of that stuff and the sort of complex beauty in each and every person that I worked with. I mean, I'll carry that forever.
Oh yeah, I'm sure. You probably wonder about all those people all the time too. Like, I wonder how they're doing. I can't imagine doing that work and then leaving that work or even just normal therapy. Like if you had a client, a patient, someone that you cared about and you worked with for a long time, and then all of a sudden they stop coming, you'd be like, I wonder what happened. I'd be on Facebook. I'd be spying on them. I'm like, are they still married? But you're doing a different kind of therapy now. And I guess it's more traditional, but yet still remote now. Is that right? Like you have all different types of patients as opposed to a special population in a treatment center like that?
Yeah, exactly. The work I was doing inpatient, it was much shorter term. So typically I'd see people for 28, 30 days. A few of them I'd see for 3 months. That was really nice. But so I went from this sort of very short term type of work to working in private practice where I could be seeing people for years, and I have seen people for years. So for a period of time, I was working with mostly like kids and adolescents. When I had to stop working for treatment and surgery and things like that. And then when I resumed work, I started virtually, and then with the move. So now everything is virtual, and I see more teens now, teens and young adults. I have a few older adults, but mostly like 13 to 23 is the big.
Well, let me then ask you I think I knew that, but let me, getting back to losing your friend in your own adolescence and the person that you were. And I knew that young woman, and she's always really impressive. And I was always like, oh yeah, I would bet on this person. I knew your parents and just knew that you were going to do great things. But is it even a fair question to ask someone who is a therapist and who is dealing with a lot of adolescent young men or women or whatever gender-wise, labels we want to use? Like if I said to you, is there a common issue that you see a lot of adolescent girls dealing with? The CDC came out with that report recently about how serious the issues that young women specifically are having. Or is it like, well, everybody is different? Because I feel like as the father to two adolescent daughters, I feel like the phone is something that we can and should talk about, and everything that goes on with social media, especially just being buried in that. I mean, you grew up in and around nature. It was a huge, important thing for your parents. And we talked about you growing up kind of straddling the smartphone. You had a smartphone, but you didn't have social media. And I think that's a lot different. The bottom line is I see my daughters looking into their device and I think of that image I saw created so long ago, just like a person diving in or being sucked in to the phone. And I see that, and I don't know exactly what it's doing, but I know it's probably not great. Is there any way for you to say specifically about that or any other issue that young women are commonly dealing with, that a lot of your patients are dealing with? Or is it more, hey, everybody has a very specific set of issues that I have to, really think specifically about?
Mm-hmm. Well, of course, everyone's case is different, but there are themes. And excuse me, I think generally what I'm seeing a lot with everybody, just high levels of anxiety all the time. And I think some of that is compounded by, the phone and the way social media works and the way our communication works now, where it's constant, right? Everyone is constantly communicating, updating. They're always accessible, or they feel the expectation to always be accessible, which is really different than how it was for me growing up, right? Where we would use landlines, you have to talk to your friend's parents first to see if they're even available.
Oh, I didn't know you were that old.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Okay. No, we all know. We know all about that. That was. Hey, is Aimee home? Can I talk to her? Yeah. Hold on a second. So and so's on the phone. If it was a dude calling, that was always way more intimidating. Or my case, I'm trying to think. Nope. No girls never called the house, but I called their house. Anyway, yeah, different, much different.
Yeah. So I think that is definitely impacting it, right? The feeling of not wanting to miss anything.
Right.
Maybe the feeling of needing to keep up with it all, to present in a certain way all the time, not just at school, right? But
I think about
school.
Women. I know nothing, but I think a lot about like the whole issue with young girls playing with dolls, with Barbies. So that it's pretty clear that created a certain body image thing, and then growing up, models and the way you'd see. But now it's like they're looking at Snapchat and Instagram and TikTok specifically, and it's like, I mean, now women are putting, people are putting effects on themselves to make them look that much better, much less forget about makeup and lighting. But it's like, I think my daughter probably thinks about the angle of her eyebrow a lot more than young girls did even before that, because they're constantly bombarded with beauty, the picture of beauty. And I just don't know who you have to be to avoid that. Man, woman, young woman, I just seems unbearable.
Yeah. And I don't think there is any avoiding it. Like I don't know if anyone is safe from it to a certain degree, which sounds kind of grim, but, we're exposed to this all the time. And I'll speak from my perspective as, a cis woman, there's messages we're told all the time. Look this way, look that way, be thin, but not too thin. Your hair looks this way, look beautiful, but not too overdone, right? Makeup, no makeup. I mean, there's just all these messages and conflicting messages, and it's constantly changing because our society is sort of constantly changing. But
that's what I want to ask you about. The other, because you said that's one thing. Sure, the phones and social media are one thing. Is another thing society changing? Is another thing that people, even, your age, much less my age, but even younger people are looking around, and whether it's rational or not, they're saying, I don't want to go out because I don't want to get a virus. I don't want to go out because I don't want to get shot. You keep seeing things in the news media, and then you apply them to your own life. I'm not worried about my kids or something going anywhere, doing anything. And then not to mention the more existential issues of climate and, the madness that Trump wrought and so on. How much of the anxiety that at least that young people are dealing with is kind of outside their home, maybe their school, their life, and more about society and what is happening in the world? There's a shooting, there's a pandemic, there's a crazy person that's our leader. How much of that is it?
I think that's a big part of it too. There's this, because we're so connected and we're getting information, lots of information all of the time. And a lot of it is not so positive. I mean, it's scary. It's frightening. I do believe that our experience during the pandemic was global collective trauma, truly. So there's that aspect of it. And I think there's a lot of sort of understandable nihilism that comes along with living in a world where climate change, that whole aspect of things, the way our world's going to be, the weather's getting worse.
I mean, women's, abortion, women have a trans people, gay people, black and brown people have legitimate concerns about the threats posed to them or the rights being taken from them. And that's a real thing. And I think that's easy for some of us to forget because no rights are necessarily being taken from you. But in a number of states, that would seem, I'm not sure how much of an issue that is to someone's core day-to-day life unless they're, I don't know. I mean, I just wonder how it comes up in therapy and how it comes up. You talked about collective trauma. I mean, it's so right with all of these things that are happening. I just wonder how much people are affected if they're connected to it.
I think they are. I think maybe their awareness of how much it impacts them, it's going to vary person to person. But, I do a lot of reminding with my clients about like what we've been through. Like the past couple of years have been really strange and scary and difficult, unprecedented. Like this is not to be just sort of glossed over. and I think that a lot of people sort of think like, oh, well, we're okay now, so I'm okay.
Right.
And that might be true. And I appreciate the optimism, but it doesn't discount like the experience that we had through those years of, the way our socializing changed, the constant fear or worry. Do I have COVID? Am I going to give it to somebody else? I mean, that's the hypervigilance that we had to keep up with for years. That has an impact on our physical body, the way we respond to these things, but psychologically as well, just having to always think about everything. Am I saying the right thing? Am I wearing my mask? Am I putting someone in danger? Am I in danger? I mean, thinking about that all the time for anyone, I think, is a lot, but especially for younger people who also have the pressures of school and who am I? High school is hard enough.
Yep.
And then you add on everything else that's happening within the world. Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot.
I want to end on something I think is positive, and I want to make sure we got to it because it's a pretty unique thing about you. Yeah. You've been to India 4 times.
Yes.
That is a country probably a lot of people will never go to or even want to go to. Mm-hmm. Why did you want to go there, and why did you go back 3 times? I know we could do a whole show and many hours just on this, but I also know it's a really important part of your life, your journey, and it's I'm sure instructed you, affected you, and all of the rest of our conversation, everything we've talked about, I'm sure experiences that you had in India with people there were probably present to help you each and every day. Why India? What's your relationship with that country and fascination with it and its culture and people?
Yeah. So the way it started, the first time I went, it was spring break of my senior year of high school. And it was me and 2 of my best friends, plus other students. But my friend Trisha, the one who passed away a few months after that, she was the one who was like, we're going to India. And Jordan, my other friend, and I, we were kind of unsure. We were looking at the other spring break trips, and she was like, no, India is it. We're going to India. Huh. So we were like, okay, India it is. And so I didn't have much intention when I first went there, but when I arrived, I was immediately transfixed, I guess. There's this particular, it's an assault on the senses from the moment you get off the plane, really. But I remember vividly walking out of the airport and the way that the air smelled, the way it felt. It was like so different and magical. And every time I go back, I try to have that same experience. I notice when I walk out of the airport, how it smells, how it sounds. So I think that's one thing that brings me back there a lot, is that it, in some ways, forces you to be very present. It's very stimulating, overstimulating at times. It's chaotic, at least from my, Western viewpoint. That's how it seemed at first. But it's really quite interesting when you allow yourself to be fully immersed and fully present and let go of trying to control every little thing. There's sense of peace and a lack of anxiety that I feel every time I'm there, which seems kind of counterintuitive. But my experience there studying abroad for a semester, I mean, I don't know if I've ever felt more at peace or without anxiety before or after that. It forced me to be very present and to notice how I was feeling, what I was seeing, to try to let go of control, and to notice the little things that bring intrigue or comfort, excitement, all of these things. It could just be a roadside cup of chai, right? And that's so beautiful and tasty and lovely. It can really make your day. And that's something I've carried with me, is that sense of appreciating the little things and trying to find that peace. Yeah.
I love that. It's a great answer, and I was not expecting it. What about the people? anything about their, it's such a diverse culture, I suppose. There's all different kinds of religions and caste system and history and different cities. And it's a giant country, so I don't know how it's like trying to describe American culture. But what can you share about maybe an experience you had with people there?
Oh, I've had so many. And you're right. It's such a big and diverse country. It's hard. I don't want to, generalize. But the experiences I had with, the people, when I was there for the semester, I lived in Delhi. I lived in a homestay. So it was, I think, six girls, students, and we lived in a house with our auntie. And she had several people who worked for her, cooks and housekeepers and a driver and, all these sorts of people. And so that was definitely a very different experience. But, for the most part, everybody that I met had such a wonderful outlook on life, similarly to sort of what I was describing about the little things, and that's things that they taught me. But you see people of all different backgrounds or, SES levels, people living on the street. But I remember I used to see people who lived on the street, who worked, but still lived on the street. And they may have 2 pairs of pants, 2 shirts. And I would see them every morning. They iron their pants every day, iron their shirts every day, get ready for the day, and they go to work. And there's this sort of this happiness that comes, I suppose, like even when you don't have so much, but they were happy. They saw the beauty in things. And that was sort of a universal thing that I saw in people, just like this joy and gratitude.
It's so hard for us to really wrap our heads around that unless you've seen it. I've heard this from a lot of people. I mean, anybody can look at someone that has less of them and seems to have more joy and be like, what the hell?
Right.
What am I missing? But I do know that I won't be happy until I get the one wheel, which is that skateboardish thing with the wheel. But it's like $1,200. I don't think I'll ever be happy because I just can't afford that. I just can't afford that. That's when I'll finally, I think, find joy.
Yeah. People have made it.
My comical way of pointing to the fact that that's what you're talking about. I won't be happy until, or I'm so upset today because of this or that. And then you look over at this guy with his 2 shirts and he's smiling and he's missing teeth, but he's laughing. And you're like, shit, I'm not even, that guy seems like he's doing better than me. I'm a wreck over here.
Yeah. What am I missing?
Right? A one wheel. Imagine if he had a one wheel. He'd be like, get this thing away from me. This is dangerous as hell. I don't want to ride this fucking thing.
Right.
That's wonderful. I really appreciate you sharing all that. I do have to add, I realize I almost forgot. You have amazing parents. I know your parents, but your dad is one of my closest friends and has been a real mentor to me in a lot of different ways, but especially and specifically on all things environmentalism, sustainability, history, and even government, how the federal government works, having, him working there. And so I want to write this book about, how to raise a daughter for men. And the point of view of the book is from women themselves. So I do have to ask you about your dad. And when I look at you on paper and now in person, everybody can see this woman who's by any measure had a lot of success, overcome her share of adversity, whatever that means, her share. But I always knew that. I've said it a couple times. What can you tell me about your dad's parenting? And I know that you guys are really close. So for some people, it's the things they learn that their dad or their parent did wrong. But what was it that your dad got right? And this is my gift back to him. It's the least I could do is obviously hear this answer from you, because I know you guys are super close. You're his only daughter, his only child. What is it about your dad? What's he been for you?
Well, there's so many things, and I don't want to leave anything major out.
Well, when you were little, how did you see him when you were a little girl? How about that?
How did I see him? Gosh, that's a good question. I think the one thing that sticks out to me in my mind is that he took me outside a lot, took me on a lot of hikes. I have very early memories of being very young, an infant, being in a backpack, and I would chew on his croquis, pull on them.
Those are the things that hold your sunglasses on. The strap. Yeah.
In
case anybody doesn't know.
Yeah. But he always took me on adventures. He never made me, there was never even a question or discussion of like, is this a boy or a girl activity? Right. And I was at times throughout my life, when I was young, I was very girly. I would go on hikes wearing princess outfits. He never said anything, it was like, we're going to go on a hike. This is what she wants to wear. It's fine. And other times I was a bit more, I only wore jeans and tie-dye, and there was never a question of things I couldn't do, I guess. It was just like, he took me along and we went on adventures, and he would do things for me too. I have this picture of us when I was probably like 6 or 7. He's painting my nails, right? So another thing, like, I always think of him as like feminist dad, right? There weren't these rigid lines of like how she should be because she's a girl, or how I should be because I'm a dad. It was just, this is my child, this person, and we're going to have these experiences together. And I think that sort of openness and the unconditional support or curiosity into who I was as a person really helped, right? The confidence he had in me translated, I internalized that, which I think is really amazing. And I think as I get older too, it allows me to, I don't have so many limitations in my mind or a box that I feel like I have to fit into as a person, as a woman, right? I can be all these things at once, and that's fine.
I think it's funny that your dad did the same thing for me that he did for his daughter, which was he opened the door and said, you should go in there. You'll be great. And I was like, hey, I don't know if I'll be good at that. I don't know. He said, you will be. I have confidence in you. Like he never questioned would it work out, this opportunity that he was creating for me to speak to young people. I was like, I don't know if I'm qualified for this. I don't know if he's like, no, you are. I know. I would know. I'd be the guy to know. I'm like, well, you are the guy to know. So I guess I am. And then it made me feel that I was good enough. I was qualified. And he's always done that. Even going camping off the grid in Maine, I'm like, I don't know if this is my thing. Yeah, you'll be fine. Yeah. And he babysat me, to be fair, but
Yeah, it's true. I think that's powerful. And even to this day, I sort of rely on that, or go to him for that type of support as well.
Did you guys have long talks about life and philosophy and stuff? Because he's also, got this musician artist mind.
We have, definitely. My mom and I were much more verbal. We had these long, in-depth conversations. Yeah.
You still do, right? Like you talk with your mom on a pretty regular basis, right?
Yeah. I talk to both of them a lot. And, the interesting thing with my dad, he and I think, tend to be a bit more reserved, but we're very similar. So sometimes there's sort of this like telepathic understanding that we have of one another, which I think is really special. So even if we're not talking as much or as verbally, I suppose, like we kind of get it.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that.
There's one thing I wanted to mention too, and I know we're getting close on time, but about my dad that sticks out is that he's a little bit of a rebel. And I always appreciated that he allowed me to be a rebel, within reason. But I think that also really, there's something about that, a parental figure encouraging or accepting, being okay with rebellion to a certain degree, that I think is really wonderful. Like, I wasn't afraid to rebel a little bit, to push the boundaries, whether it was with them or it was mostly other people. I think because I knew they were safe, that it allowed me to stick it to the man elsewhere, right? It's like the conflict wasn't within the house, but maybe outside. And the fact that he was a little rebellious and so was I, and I knew we had that in common, it helped me to be much braver moving forward,
I love that. I love that. Yeah. And I know that about your dad. And he's done the same thing for me in a different way. But a lot of times it's like, read this book. It's by Edward Abbey. I'm like, who's that? He's like, just read it. It's good. Mm-hmm. The Monkey Wrench Gang. Who are they? Yeah. I'll let the listener go look at that if they haven't already. But yeah, I love that. That's a really thoughtful and specific thing to say. And what a wonderful thing to be able to give your son or daughter. I don't know how that's always given. It's got to be pretty unique and original, but I love that. That's awesome.
Yeah.
All right, Aimee. I love talking to you. I love watching you grow and see all that you've done, and can't wait to see whatever is next for you. And I'm sure a lot of people will probably want to reach out, and you can contact Aimee, and I'll talk more about it after I say goodbye. Thank you so much for doing this. This is really amazing, and I want to do it again. I have a lot more questions for you about, your generation, your life, and I think a lot of people would love to hear from you again. So thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. I'm honored that you would even ask me. But this was wonderful, and I'd love to talk anytime.
Awesome.
I love talking with you. So thank you.
Thank you, Aimee Chase. There she goes, everybody. Look her up. Maybe you could hire her, be your therapist. You can reach out. All the information for Aimee is in the show notes, like every day's shows and guests. I hope you liked that. I worked real hard on it. We had a great conversation, and I really want to do more of those, but I always want to hear your feedback, and it's something a little bit different. Always trying to do different stuff here. It's a daily podcast looking for new ideas, so send them my way, standuppwithpete@gmail.com, and thank you very much to Aimee and to her dad, Steve, for introducing us, and let me know who you think I should interview in the Gen Zeries. I certainly need to talk to probably a guy the next time. So I know people have sent in a few ideas. I need to go through them. I'm not sure when the next one is, but always want to hear from you. So let me know. All right. Thanks so much for listening, and I will talk to you the next time here on Stand Up. As always, the great John Carroll singing us out.
Well, there's a whole lot more of us who know us right. They'll keep right on ignoring us if we keep sitting tight. You got to open up the window to let in some light. You got to stand up. You got to rise up, you got to stand up, you got to stare the devil straight in the eye. We got to let him know it's his turn to go. See it clear and all you hear is a lie. So get up off of your butt, get down off of your fence. And even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense. And you stand up, stand up. Point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Boy, you better stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up. They had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of a stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We got to let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. While you lying awake wondering where the money all went, it'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right. We got to speak up, we got to reach up, and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up.